Let's create a scatter plot. To create a scatter plot, you first need to make a quick decision between your two variables of which one causes which, because that will determine which one goes on the x-axis and which one goes on the y. If we're comparing beach attendance and temperature, we would have to decide which one is likely to cause the other. Does the number of people at the beach cause the temperature to change? Probably not. But does the temperature cause the number of people at the beach to change? Definitely. The warmer days are typically going to attract a lot more people to the beach. So we would say that our explanatory variable is temperature. So we'll label that here. Explanatory variable is temperature, and therefore the response variable is the beach attendance. The other thing we have is x-axis and y-axis. The explanatory variable goes on the x-axis. The response variable goes on the y-axis, so we can plot those now. We said temperature on the x-axis, and we have beach attendance over here on the y. Here is our data. At 60 degrees, we have 8 people at the beach, 65, 20, and so forth. So this is the data that we've collected. Since our temperature goes from 60 degrees to 90 degrees, we would plot our x-axis accordingly here with our labels. And beach attendance goes from 8 to 170, so we do the same thing here. We make sure we covered that entire range. Then we go about plotting data points one at a time. So starting here, we have 8 people at the beach and a temperature of 60 degrees. So if we plot that on here, 60 degrees and 8 is going to be roughly about here. So we plot our dot. That represents one data point, one paired value of two variables. Next is 65 and 20. Go to 65, we go to about 20, graph that, and continue on. 70 and roughly 39, 75 and 68. And what you'll see here is I'm graphing everything by hand. Eventually we will move to the calculator to do some of these graphs, but for now you will just plot each point one by one. 85 is at 143 up here, and 90 is at close to 170. So as you can see from this graph, you actually have a pretty clear pattern forming. And although it's not perfectly linear, it's very close to linear. So the correlation and the association are both going to be very strong in this graph. If you go ahead and put it in your calculator, you're going to end up getting something like this. Now let's see, how can we get this graph in our calculator? First thing you do in your calculator is you go to Stat, Edit, just as you would when we did one variable distributions of actual data. The first thing you'll type in then is your X data in the list 1 in L1 and your Y data, your response data, in L2. So L1 is going to be your X, L2 is going to be your Y. So you go up and you clear your list from whatever data you have in there before, and then you just enter all of your values in order. You're going to want to make sure you keep everything in order and don't skip anything, because it's going to assume that this value will correspond to that Y value here, this L1 value to this L2 value. So go ahead and type in all your numbers. Once you have all the data values typed in here, you should see that both of these lists are the same length. If they are not, that means you made a mistake somewhere. So you'll get an error in your calculator if you don't fix that. Now, all you need to do is the same thing we did when we graphed a histogram. Once the data is in there, you go to Zoom, and you go to 9. Uh-oh, nothing comes up. So how do you make sure that this thing is set in the right mode to graph a scatter plot? This is something you only have to do once while you're setting up for scatter plots, unless you change to a different type of graph. But you go to Second, Stat Plot, so second Y equals, and it says my plots are turned off. So I'm going to turn on my plot 1. And once it's turned on, I'm going to set it to scatter plot mode, which is the very first one here. So when it's blinking over that, I'll hit enter to select it. And other than that, I know that my X list is L1 and my Y list is L2. That's exactly what I planned on. So let's try this again. Let's go to Zoom 9, and there's our graph. There's our data plotted right for us. And that's really all it takes to make a scatter plot by hand and then make it in your calculator. Remember that when you're actually doing it by hand, you have to obviously do all your labels. When you're doing it in your calculator, you're generally just looking for a pattern, so we're not going to worry about the details of getting all your labeling and axes written down.